Adolf Hitler, one of the most infamous figures in world history, was born on April 20, 1889, in a small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn. His father, Alois Hitler, was an ill-tempered customs official who had risen through the ranks of the Austrian civil service. Alois, already in his 50s when Adolf was born, was a German nationalist but remained loyal to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He had changed his surname from Schicklgruber to Hitler, a misspelling of his stepfather's name, Hiedler. Adolf's mother, Clara Polzel, was Alois' third wife and considerably younger than her husband. She was known for her kindness and piety, but the Hitler household was far from a nurturing environment. The young Adolf grew up in a troubled family dynamic, marked by his father's harsh discipline and frequent conflicts. As a child, Hitler showed an early interest in German nationalism, influenced by his teachers and the political climate of the time. His academic performance was unremarkable, and he struggled to find direction in his youth. In 1907, at the age of 18, Hitler moved to Vienna with dreams of becoming an artist. However, his aspirations were quickly dashed when he was rejected twice by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. The years in Vienna proved to be formative for Hitler's worldview. Living in relative poverty and surrounded by the diverse ethnic groups of the imperial capital, he was exposed to and embraced virulent anti-Semitism and radical German nationalism. These ideologies would later form the core of his political beliefs and the Nazi Party's platform. When World War I broke out in 1914, Hitler enthusiastically enlisted in the Bavarian army. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, experiencing the brutal realities of trench warfare. Despite the hardships, Hitler found a sense of purpose in military service and was decorated for bravery, receiving the Iron Cross First Class in 1980. World War I and the subsequent Treaty of Versailles had a profound impact on Germany and on Hitler personally. The harsh terms imposed on Germany, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and crippling reparations, fueled a sense of national humiliation and resentment. Hitler, like many Germans, felt betrayed by the country's leadership and blamed various groups, particularly Jews and communists, for Germany's defeat. In this atmosphere of political and economic turmoil, Hitler found his calling in politics. In 1919, he joined the German Workers' Party, a small nationalist group in Munich. Recognizing Hitler's oratorical skills and charisma, the party's leadership soon gave him a prominent role. Hitler quickly rose through the ranks, and in 19 he orchestrated the renaming of the party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, more commonly known as the Nazi Party. As the chief propagandist of the Nazi Party, Hitler honed his skills as a public speaker and developed the core tenets of Nazi ideology. He blended extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, and anti-communism with promises of German renewal and expansion. His fiery speeches, which blamed Jews and other minorities for Germany's problems and promised a return to greatness, resonated with many disaffected Germans. Hitler's growing influence and the Nazi Party's increasing popularity culminated in the Beer Hall Putsch of November 1923. This attempted coup in Munich aimed to overthrow the Bavarian government and march on Berlin. However, the putsch failed, and Hitler was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. During his imprisonment at Landsberg prison, Hitler dictated the first volume of Mein Kampf to his deputy, Rudolf Hess. This autobiographical manifesto outlined Hitler's political ideology and future plans for Germany. It laid out his views on race, his hatred of Jews and communists, and his vision of German expansion and domination. Upon his early release from prison in December 1924, Hitler set about rebuilding the Nazi Party. He focused on legal means to gain power, recognizing that the failed putsch had damaged the party's reputation. Hitler restructured the party, centralizing authority around himself and developing a cult of personality. The late 1920s and early 1930s saw Hitler and the Nazi Party capitalize on Germany's economic hardships and political instability. The Great Depression hit Germany particularly hard, leading to mass unemployment and social unrest. Hitler's promises of economic revival, national pride, and scapegoating of minorities found an increasingly receptive audience. The Nazi Party's propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, proved highly effective in spreading their message. They utilized modern techniques, including radio broadcasts, mass rallies, and striking visual imagery, to appeal to a broad spectrum of German society. Hitler's charismatic speeches, which blended populist rhetoric with nationalist fervor, drew ever larger crowds. As the Nazi Party gained seats in the Reichstag, Hitler positioned himself as a strong leader who could restore order and prosperity to Germany. Despite initial resistance from the political establishment, the increasing political deadlock and economic crises led conservative leaders to view Hitler as a potential ally against the left. On January 30, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. This appointment, intended by some as a way to control Hitler by boxing him in with a conservative cabinet, instead gave him the platform he needed to consolidate power. The pivotal moment came on February 27, 1933, when the Reichstag building was set on fire. The Nazis quickly blamed the communists, using the event to stoke fear and justify emergency measures. The following day, Hitler persuaded President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed for the arrest of political opponents. In March 1933, the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, effectively granting Hitler dictatorial powers. This act marked the end of the Weimar Republic and the beginning of the Nazi dictatorship. Hitler moved swiftly to eliminate all opposition, banning other political parties and consolidating all power around himself and the Nazi Party. Hitler rose through the ranks of the Nazi Party in the early 1920s, eventually becoming its leader in 1921. By 1930, his party was the largest in the Reichstag, but still not enough support for him to become chancellor. This position would only come in January of 1933, when President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor, and the rest, as they say, is history. But what exactly made Adolf Hitler such an evil person? Let's find out. Here are the top 10 most evil things that Adolf Hitler did. Number 9. Consolidation of power. Hitler became the dictator of Germany really fast after he consolidated all power under himself by eliminating all forms of political opposition. His first target was the German trade unions, which he disbanded and replaced with the German Labor Front, which had no real power. Next, he turned against the communists and socialists, having them arrested and sent to concentration camps. He also got rid of potential enemies within his own party who disagreed with his methods. All of these consolidations of power happened during the first 6 years of Hitler's reign. The consolidation culminated in the Night of the Long Knives in 1934 when Hitler eliminated his political rivals within the SA. The Night of the Long Knives was an event during which Hitler got rid of his opponents. On June 30th, 1934, Hitler ordered the arrest of his political opponents from the Sturmabteilung or the SA. He then went ahead and ordered their execution. Over 1,000 people were killed. It was called the Night of the Long Knives because Hitler ordered the execution of Ernst Röhm, the leader of the SA, despite being one of Hitler's closest confidants and friends. In 1934, the president of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg, died, and Hitler inherited the presidency and the title of Führer, meaning that he now had absolute authority. With this position, Hitler started to change Germany's government from a Weimar Republic to a fascist state. He then proceeded to take full control of the military, making it a part of his government and renaming it the German Armed Forces. Hitler also placed loyal Nazis in key positions in the government, including the police and civil service. He then passed laws granting him even more power and making opposition to him a criminal offense. By 1939, Hitler had complete control over Germany. Everything from the economy to the culture to the education system was controlled by him, and the Nazi Party, the only thing left for him to do was consolidate his power outside of Germany. Number 8. Reoccupation of the Rhineland. After coming to power, one of Hitler's first moves was reoccupy the Rhineland. You see, after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles had prohibited German troops from entering the Rhineland. But in March of 1936, Hitler sent troops to occupy the region. No other European nations stopped him because they feared war. This was a good move by Hitler because the Rhine region provided raw materials and cheap labor to the German war machine. It also allowed him to practice military tactics on German soil, thus preparing for future invasions. Number 7. Annexation of Austria. After consolidating power in Germany, Hitler decided to annex Austria, a move known as the Anschluss. You see, Hitler believed that all Germans lived under his rule, and he wanted to unite all Germans. So the next logical step was to annex Austria, which had a large German population. So in March of 1938, German troops occupied Austria and made it a part of Germany. Now, this is where things get interesting. See, Hitler hadn't planned on annexing Austria so soon. In fact, he had planned on waiting until after conquering Russia. But due to a number of factors, including the young Austrian chancellor's resignation and pro-Nazi demonstrations in Austria, Hitler decided to act earlier than expected. As soon as the German troops entered Austria, people came out of their homes waving German flags and cheering, and that made Hitler think that the annexation was the right move. No. 6. Annexation of the After annexing Austria, Hitler turned his attention to the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, which had many ethnic Germans living in it. In September of 1938, Hitler demanded that Czechoslovakia cede the Sudetenland to Germany. When Czechoslovakia refused, Hitler threatened war, and once again no nation intervened. France and Britain were eager to avoid another world war, so they agreed to Hitler's demands. And just like that, the Sudetenland became a part of Germany. 5. Ideology and the Nazi state. One of the main reasons why Hitler was able to come to power in the first place was the fact that Germany had been in a bad state following World War I. Germany had lost the war. Their economy was terrible. People were hungry and angry, and it seemed as if there was no hope for the country. Hitler capitalized on this despair and offered Germans hope for a better future if he became their chancellor. To achieve this goal, he created a personality cult around himself. Posters, newspapers, books, films, and public rallies glorified Hitler and promoted NATO. School children were taught to salute Hitler in the morning and to pledge allegiance to him. Even soldiers swore loyalty to Hitler rather than to Germany, and the propaganda worked. People saw him as a great leader and put their trust in him. Soon after Hitler consolidated power, he started to implement his racist ideology. The first victims of this ideology were the Jews. In 1935, he passed a series of anti-Semitic laws known as the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped German Jews of their citizenship and banned them from marrying non-Jews. He then went ahead and enacted the infamous Kristallnacht, where Nazis attacked Jewish homes, businesses and synagogues across Germany and Austria. Thousands of Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Hitler didn't just target the Jews though. He also persecuted other minorities, including the Roma, disabled people and homosexuals. Anyone who was different or who did not conform to Nazi ideals was targeted by the regime. Hitler also created the Hitler Youth, an organization aimed at indoctrinating young German boys into Nazi. Children were taught to be loyal to Hitler and the Nazi Party, and were trained to be soldiers. Members of the Hitler Youth participated in political rallies, performed military drills, and were given paramilitary training. Number 4. The Gestapo and SS. Another reason why Hitler was able to maintain control over Germany and carry out his evil plans was the creation of two organizations, the Gestapo and the SS. The Gestapo was the official secret police of Nazi Germany. Its main responsibilities included spying on citizens, arresting people suspected of crimes against the state and torturing prisoners to extract confessions. The SS, on the other hand, was a paramilitary organization that acted as the personal bodyguards of Hitler and other top Nazi officials. However, the SS soon grew beyond that and became involved in a wide range of activities, including running the concentration camps, overseeing deportations, and carrying out Number 3. Ideological fanaticism. Hitler was a true fanatic. He was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. He did not care about the cost in lives or the destruction he left in his wake. This fanaticism led to World War II, during which millions of people were killed and entire cities were wiped off the map. Hitler was also responsible for the Holocaust, during which the Nazis systematically murdered approximately 2/3 of the Jewish population of Europe. He was obsessed with purging the world of anyone he considered undesirable, including Jews, Roma, disabled people and homosexuals. During the Holocaust, the Nazis used gas chambers, firing squads, and forced labor to murder their victims. Hitler's ideological fanaticism also extended to his treatment of other countries. He believed that Germany was the master race and that other countries were inferior. This belief led to Germany's invasion of Poland, which sparked the beginning of World War II. 2. Charismatic leader. Part of what made Hitler such an evil person was the fact that he was a charismatic leader. This allowed him to gain the support of the German people and to rally them behind his hateful agenda. Hitler was a skilled orator and was able to persuade people that his vision for Germany was the only way forward. He was also able to capitalize on the fears and prejudices of the German people, which made him even more popular. Number 1. Propaganda. One of the main ways that Hitler maintained control over Germany was through propaganda. The Nazi government controlled all forms of media, including newspapers, radio, and film. They used this control to spread Nazi propaganda and to promote Hitler's hateful agenda. For example, Nazi films often portrayed Jews as dangerous and subversive, while Nazi radio broadcasts glorified Hitler and the Nazi Party. The government also sponsored massive rallies, where Hitler would speak to crowds of people and brainwash them into supporting Nazis. One of the most famous of these rallies was the Nuremberg rallies, which were held annually from 1933 to 1938. These rallies were massive events that attracted people from all over Germany. They featured huge parades, military demonstrations, and speeches from Nazi leaders. The purpose of the rallies was to promote Nazi propaganda and to solidify Hitler's control over Germany. World War I. When World War I broke out in 1914, Hitler immediately enlisted in the German army. He served with the Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment and was decorated several times for bravery. However, his war record is also marked by instances of extreme violence and ruthlessness. He was involved in the suppression of revolts in Belgium and France and was known for his harsh treatment of prisoners of war. By the end of the war, Hitler held strong nationalist views, blaming the German defeat on what he perceived as internal enemies, including Jews, and this experience would deeply influence his future political agenda. 3. The rise of Nazism. After the war, Hitler joined the German Workers' Party, later renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party or Nazi Party. He quickly rose through the ranks, leveraging his charisma and powerful rhetoric to attract followers. His core political ideology revolved around extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, and a desire for German reunification. Hitler's speeches were filled with vitriolic attacks against Jews, whom he blamed for Germany's economic woes, and he promoted a cult of personality that made him a near-messianic figure for his followers. By 1923, he was leading the party in its famous Beer Hall Putsch, an attempt to seize power in Munich that ultimately failed and landed him in prison. Despite this setback, Hitler continued to grow the Nazi Party, writing his book, Mein Kampf, while in prison, which laid out his political ideology and goals for the future of Germany. After his release from prison, he kept expanding his support base, capitalizing on public anger over the Treaty of Versailles and the Great Depression, and in 1933 he was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Number 4. Consolidation of power. Once in power, Hitler wasted no time in consolidating his authority and purging his opponents. He established a totalitarian state, suppressing all opposition and dissent. The Nazi Party's paramilitary wing, the SA, carried out violent attacks against political rivals and trade unions. Hitler also used propaganda and the cult of personality to solidify his control over the German people. Under his leadership, Germany underwent rapid and radical changes. Key among these was the introduction of the Nuremberg Laws in 1935, which stripped Jews of their citizenship and prohibited marriages between Jews and non-Jews. These laws marked a significant escalation in Nazi persecution of Jews. In 1938, the annexation of Austria, followed by the infamous a night of violence against Jews across Germany. These events set the stage for the full-scale horrors of the Holocaust that were yet to come. World War II and military expansion. In 1939, Hitler's plans for territorial expansion culminated in the invasion of Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. Germany's strategy in the war was based on Blitzkrieg, a combination of speed and overwhelming force. This was employed successfully in the conquest of Western Europe, with France falling in just 6 weeks after the bombing of Britain. Hitler's attention turned to the Soviet Union. In Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the USSR began. Despite early successes, this campaign bogged down due to logistical issues and fierce Soviet resistance. This was partly due to Hitler's insistence on fighting a defensive war despite being the aggressor. Around the same time, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the war, solidifying the alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan, known as the Axis powers. The tide of the war began to turn against Germany after the Battle of Stalingrad in 1942, a brutal and decisive engagement that inflicted heavy losses on both sides but ultimately weakened Germany. The following year, the D-Day landings in 1943 saw Allied forces establish a beachhead in Western Europe, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Throughout 1944, the Allies advanced steadily, aided by the massive bombing campaign against Germany. Numerous assassination attempts on Hitler, such as the July 20th plot led by Claus von Stauffenberg, failed to end his rule. No. 6. Decline and defeat. The last years of Hitler's life were marked by desperation and delusion. As the war situation grew increasingly hopeless, he retreated into his private apartments in the Berlin Chancellery, becoming more and more detached from reality. Surrounded by his inner circle, he refused to accept the true extent of Germany's defeats and continued making futile military decisions. Hitler's health also deteriorated significantly, likely due to a combination of Parkinson's disease, drug-induced psychosis, and other factors. This decline culminated in the Battle of Berlin in April 1945, as Soviet troops closed in on the city. On April 29th, Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker along with his wife, Eva Braun, and several other members of his inner circle. Their bodies were taken outside and burned. Some reports suggest that remains may have been lost or destroyed during the battle, but the mystery continues. The discovery of Hitler's remains was confirmed by Soviet authorities who displayed them to the public in 1946. Doubts about the authenticity of these remains surfaced in the 1970s. These remains were later transferred to a Moscow archive, further limiting access for independent analysis. Number 7. The Holocaust. While Hitler's actions during World War II are numerous and varied, perhaps his most heinous and consequential was his role in orchestrating the Holocaust. The systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of Jews across German-occupied Europe. This dark chapter in history was made possible by the pervasive anti-Semitism of Nazi ideology, which demonized Jews as a threat to the racial purity and national security of Germany. It began with discriminatory legislation, escalated through organized violence, and culminated in the establishment of concentration and death camps like Auschwitz. It was during the war that the so-called final solution was implemented, marking a shift from persecution to mass extermination. Hitler himself played a pivotal role in this, though his exact involvement and the extent of his influence on key decisions have been subjects of debate. Known for his powerful speeches and charismatic personality, Hitler swayed public opinion and rallied support for the Nazi agenda. In Mein Kampf, he outlined his racial theories and his hatred towards Jews. Once in power, he used propaganda and a network of loyal supporters to isolate and vilify Jews, setting the stage for their systematic elimination. Millions of Jews were deported to concentration camps where they were subjected to horrific atrocities, including forced labor, torture, and mass killings. The gas chambers of places like Treblinka and Sobibor became symbols of Nazi brutality. While Jews were the primary targets, the Nazis also persecuted and murdered other groups deemed undesirable, including Roma, gay men, people with disabilities, and political opponents. The full scope of the Holocaust remains a haunting testament to human cruelty and the dangers of unchecked prejudice and totalitarian rule. In total, it is estimated that 6 million Jews and millions of others were murdered during the Holocaust. Number 8. Death and legacy. Hitler's death in the midst of Germany's collapse brought an end to the brutal era of Nazi rule. His body, along with those of Eva Braun and several others, were found in the remains of the Führer bunker, offering a grim conclusion to a tyrannical reign. The news of his death spread quickly, sending shockwaves that reverberated across the world. It was a moment of jubilation for those who had suffered under the Nazi regime, and a sobering realization for many that the architect of some of the 20th century's darkest atrocities was finally gone. Yet the story doesn't end there. Hitler's legacy, much like his impact on the course of history, is profound and multiple. The horrors of the Holocaust, the scars of war, and the chilling tale of his rise to power serve as stark reminders of the dangers of extremism, fanaticism, and unchecked ambition. The post-war period saw efforts to hold his followers accountable through initiatives like the Nuremberg trials aimed at bringing Nazi leaders to justice. However, the full measure of his impact can be seen in the ongoing struggle to confront Holocaust denial, the continuous search for his remains, and the enduring efforts to preserve the memory of his victims. Even today, his name carries a weight that evokes fear, loathing, and remembrance. Hitler's story is not merely a historical footnote, it's a cautionary tale that continues to shape our world, reminding us of the importance of vigilance, tolerance, and the courage to stand against tyranny in all its forms. Number 9. Psychological profile and leadership style. Understanding Hitler's personality and leadership style is crucial to comprehending his actions and the devastating consequences that followed. While it's essential to avoid armchair debate, certain aspects of his behavior and documented accounts offer insights into the psyche of a man who plunged the world into darkness. From an early age, Hitler displayed traits that would become defining characteristics. His charm and charisma were undeniable, allowing him to captivate audiences and build a devoted following. This was instrumental in his rise to power, as it enabled him to sway public opinion and garner support for his radical agenda. However, beneath his charismatic exterior lay a deeply disturbed individual prone to bouts of extreme anger and violence. His violent tendencies were well known, even to his close circle, and often manifested in outbursts of rage directed at those he perceived as subordinates. This volatile nature contributed significantly to the climate of fear that permeated Nazi Germany, where dissent was met with swift and severe punishment. Furthermore, Hitler's leadership style was one of absolute control and obedience. He demanded unwavering loyalty from his followers, and surrounded himself with a coterie of who amplified his delusions of grandeur. This created an echo chamber that insulated him from reality and allowed his paranoia and megalomania to flourish unchecked. A key aspect of understanding Hitler is recognizing his deep-seated obsession with power, control, and racial purity. His intense focus on these themes, evident in his speeches and writings, was a manifestation of his warped worldview. He believed in a hierarchical society where Germans of pure Aryan descent dominated others, and where Jews were an existential threat. This distorted perception drove his foreign and domestic policies, leading to the annexation of Austria, the invasion of Poland, and the systematic persecution of Jews. It's important to note that, while these characteristics offer some insight into Hitler's psyche, they do not excuse or justify his actions. They serve as reminders of the capacity for evil that exists within humanity and the importance of challenging toxic leadership and ideologies wherever they may appear. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.